after many, many people that I had worked with in therapy, I took what I didn't get from my dad and what I got from my mom and was able to give people what they needed. I could understand the unavailability, but I could also understand what these people deserved and needed through the example of my mother.
Welcome to Journeys Through Change, a podcast that inspires women to let go of the fear and say yes to possibility. I'm your host, Noelle Van, an author, creator, and empowerment coach who spent years in corporate America helping innovators and leaders ride the waves of change with ease and grace. I now work with women to step into change and unleash the power they have to create a life they love. Whether you're contemplating a change in your career, relationship, health, lifestyle, or anything in between, nothing's off the table. I'll be offering up simple insights to help you manage the ups and downs of change and sharing interviews with successful women who took a leap of faith to create the life they knew they were meant to live, sharing their wisdom, advice, and all the juicy lessons they learned along the way. So get cozy in your favorite comfy chair and let's get started. It's often difficult to connect the dots when it comes to the family dynamics that shape us into the adults we are today. Whether you had parents who were hands-on, hands-off, physically present or absent, the relationships we have with our mother and father, as well as the role models we had within our family, set the foundation for who we become later in life. Marie Selleck grew up surrounded by generations of strong women and credits her ability to understand the layers of complexity within families to her ongoing curiosity and interest in understanding her own. She is a licensed therapist and an empowerment coach who specializes in helping mothers break unhealthy cycles that began in their own childhood. Drawing on her professional training combined with personal experience, she guides mothers through a healing journey to become the grounded, present parent they aspire to be, empowering them to end intergenerational trauma and create new family legacies rooted in emotional health and connection. Marie, we are so happy to have you join us here today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
There's so many different things about what you do that I'm curious about, but we're not going to dive head on into that yet. I think we should probably start by having you tell us just a little bit about your upbringing and kind of, the background that you were brought up in and sort of how that has brought you to us today.
I was raised by my mom and dad until I was 10, and then my parents divorced. Really, at the foundation of it, I was raised in, my mom's side of the family was really focused about giving back. So my grandmother was a high school guidance counselor, and my grandfather was a Baptist minister, but very liberal. And he worked in jail systems doing prison ministry. He was a community college professor for 10 years. So I was raised doing a lot of work in missions, working in soup kitchens. There's a huge foundation to my mom's side of the family that is giving back and really supporting people that are less affluent or have less than you do.
Nice. This is your mother's side of the family, and you're saying your grandfather was the one that was kind of did foundation work around giving back.
Yeah, it was my grandfather's family were the ones that were really focused around support, especially supporting strong women. So they're the ones who encouraged my grandmother to go to college and get her master's degree while they were married. And my grandmother actually came from a father who was really, really focused around education, but my great grandmother didn't have an education. So there was a lot of focus on that side of the family about how important it was to have this education and educate yourself in order to help others.
That's such an interesting background, first of all, but way to grow up. So how did that take shape in your upbringing? Were you always working with doing volunteer work? Were you doing a lot of that kind of stuff as you were growing up?
So it shifted a lot at different times. So my parents divorced when I was 10. My dad is pretty dysfunctional, which is why I kind of do what I do. I have a really strong mother, but a pretty dysfunctional dad. And so there was a huge shift to, yes, I grew up when I was really young with giving back, volunteering with my grandpa. We're always a family who, you donate, you help others if you have the ability to do that. But after the divorce, there was a lot of really turning back and learning how to take care of yourself. And what I mean by that is me watching my mom have to decline being engaged in certain things because she was working a full time job as a professor, because we needed stuff and we needed the attention, the emotional attention and support and help with school and challenges and all of those things. And so I witnessed my mom, though we're always about giving back, her having to pull back from doing maybe as much as she wanted to do, really for self preservation and to really focus on us. Also knowing that she would eventually be able to go back and do that, which is what she's doing now, but really having these moments in life where you do have to shift and you might not be able to do everything. So that's really taught me a lot of balance and how do you do those things.
And you have a family of how many kids are in your family?
I have a younger sister. She's about 3.5 years younger than me.
So after the divorce, obviously the dynamic shifts, but did you find that you had to take on additional kind of responsibility and do it? Because it sounds like she was not as present as she could have been.
So she was pretty present. She actually prioritized being home as much as possible. She changed positions at one time at the university so that she could work from home and be there more often. She just couldn't do as much volunteering or giving back to the community or being involved in her church and stuff like that. The thing I guess that didn't change is she still took care of everything. Before my parents divorced, my dad still didn't take care of anything. He wasn't really there for us. He was never
Right.
home for dinner. So think what shifted was this mental shift in me and my sister to just participate, do things in the household, because we just innately knew like mom has a lot going on, so we need to participate and help with that. Because again, we were raised with very early on with giving back.
When you went into, and you kind of have told me a little bit about the path that you took to get to where you are today, but did you go into social work? Was that right out of college?
My undergrad is actually in environmental studies and international development. And it's a funny story because there was one class I was taking and I had an internship and I had a lot of stuff I wanted to say. Like I had a lot of issues with the program, like ethical stuff and all of that I went, and the person who ran that program or oversaw it was in the social work department. And she just looks at me after I say this and says, "You need to be a social worker." And I just went, "Absolutely not. The system will drive me mad. It will make me upset." But of course, a year out of undergrad, I'm like, I got to go back and be a social worker. And so I ended up going back to grad school for 3 years and becoming a licensed therapist.
And this is where I think that it feels like the points sort of interchange or sort of come together, where you were saying that kind of due to your father's, the way that your father was and his, the way he interacted with the family was one of the maybe things that drove you towards going toward that line of work. Was there a pivotal moment there that you were shifted into being interested in that? Where does that all come together? Like, was that something that just you feel as though there are things that you grew up with that moved you in that direction? Or is there something more specific that you were like, this is really what I meant to do?
I always knew I needed to go into being a therapist on some level. Just the dynamics that I saw that other people didn't see. Even when the professor had said that to me, I'm like, absolutely not. It will drive me mad. Like I had already thought about this, right? The moment that actually was the pivot is I got married, and the person that I got married to had a ton of reminders of my dad. So very not present, never following through on things, not dependable, really emotionally distant. And all the stuff that came together is I started therapy in 2013. I started grad school in 2013. I started recognizing the similarities in my husband at the time and my dad around 2013. And then in 2015, my husband and I divorced. I finished grad school a year later and then went working and becoming a therapist. And I guess a big part of it is I noticed this connection I had to women that would come to therapy just because they're more likely to go to therapy, talking about their unavailable mom. And I realized, I was talking, I was, doing therapy, and their faces would tell me they'd never heard these things before in this way explained to them, that they were having all of these aha moments. And I realized after many, many people that I had worked with in therapy, I took what I didn't get from my dad and what I got from my mom and was able to give people what they needed. I could understand the unavailability, but I could also understand what these people deserved and needed through the example of my mother.
Well, and what's fascinating to me is how you just described, when you described your mom, where she could have sort of every reason to become more distant because of the circumstances that were around her, right? Like there was every opportunity for her to take that route, but she didn't, right? So she was able to come back even after divorce and all of the things that go with that and all the additional things that were now on her plate. And to have that sort of, I don't know if it's a dichotomy or if there's that difference in approach from both parents. The fact that that's come together for you and was made you work even more capable of helping people, knowing those both sides of it, right? Knowing the unavailability and the availability regardless of the situation.
I was actually even talking to her last night, and how her ability to step away from my dad helped me in not staying in my marriage for an extended amount of time and making the choice that I wasn't getting what I needed, and neither was he. And so stepping away, and I told myself, well, if I'm going to be a therapist, I need to do what I'm working with other people to help them to do.
It sounds to me, though, just in how that all took place in 2013, it's like the minute you said that, I thought to myself, wow, that's one of those things that happens almost in like fast time. Like you're coming to realize things, you're learning, you're getting your master's, you're ending a relationship because you're coming to the realization of what it's all about and what you really want in life. I mean, it feels like that was a pretty pivotal year for you.
It was hugely pivotal, hugely pivotal. I learned a lot about myself. I learned heavy, heavy communication skills that I hadn't had before because I was trying to figure out my marriage and make it work, to the point where I'm like, well, I got all these skills, but they're still not working. So I got to let it go. And then I was also looking back from now and what I do now, I'm looking at what was I getting out of the relationship? Who was I becoming? I actually lost myself in my marriage, which is not uncommon with growing up with an emotionally unavailable parent, because you're trying to figure out who you are and you never solidified that, or you always tried to be who they wanted you to be.
And I would imagine, too, not getting a lot of feedback on that, right? If there's a lack of communication, it's like there's sort of this, not an abyss, but you have this disconnect there that just perpetuates itself.
Oh, absolutely.
When you work with women, so when you say that some of this sort of came to a culmination when you started to recognize in them some of the things that you knew that you could connect with, what are some of the things that come up with women that you find are patterns of behavior that sometimes bubble up because of having maybe an unavailable parent or having an issue like that growing up, how that sort of comes into adulthood?
So I've broken it down to this really foundational belief. When you're not treated as a priority as a child, you grow up believing that you're not good enough. And then what I see is this pattern: as you get older, you're always battling this belief of not good enough. So I'm not a good enough spouse. I'm not good enough for a spouse. I'm not a good enough mom. We already have mom guilt. That's already a societal thing. Add being not good enough on top of that. I'm not good enough at my job. We already have a societal belief, that societal struggle that women have in the job field of not being good enough or having to overcompensate for being a woman. Add not good enough on top of that. I'm not good enough at taking care of myself. Let's go practice some self care. It's always this not good enough that they're battling. And it comes out in every aspect that wants to hold a woman down.
Well, and I can imagine that amplifies. I am not a mother myself, so I'm only saying this from it shows up for all of us in different ways. But I can imagine once you have children of your own, that can show up in different ways as kids are getting older and they're going through different stages in their lives. And you're like, I feel like it's just kind of an ongoing thing that could sort of perpetuate itself.
Oh yeah. So the shift that I've seen just by doing my coaching business for the last year and working with women is the women who join the program typically have kids. And I've observed this even in myself as I now have a 3-year-old. The biggest shift happens when you have kids because you all of a sudden take what your parents are saying to you and you use empathy and duplicate it in your head as though you would say it to your child. And it blows your mind because you love this child unconditionally, right? Like they could do no wrong, essentially. You want to guide and nurture them, but then you're duplicating the things, the passive aggressive comments, the dysfunction, and you're going, I would sacrifice everything for this child. So then you start a huge grieving process of how could you possibly do that to me? Because you're noticing things that you didn't notice before because you're now a parent.
Do you find that women that you work with need to come to some reconciliation with their parents? Is part of therapy, and this is if it's possible, right? Because sometimes parents aren't available or no longer in their lives or may no longer be alive, right? So, I mean, are there things that you work with women on to kind of, I don't know, process through that in a way that they can then move beyond it?
Absolutely. So when I talk to women, this is actually a really big question that women have all the time with me is how do I forgive or how do I find closure? And how I really teach this in coaching is that forgiving is not forgetting. Okay. Forgiving is essentially acknowledging the patterns and the generational cycles that brought your parent to that point, and then figuring out what boundaries you need to not continue to absorb the behaviors or accept the behaviors. It's not forgiving and getting over it because these are deep wounds. You're not expected to get over it. That would actually be terrible. And then closure is the part of it where you have to figure out what you need to feel okay. Is it creating a separate community? Is it leaning into other people? Is it having that shallow relationship where you don't talk about anything deep? Is it calling them once every couple months to just seeing how they are because that's what you have to do? But it's not this end point of them admitting their faults and asking for forgiveness. That is not a realistic goal.
Right. Which we often, I think, sort of falsely think, oh, well, it's all going to be better if they would just apologize type of thing. And when you think of that family dynamic, I mean, I look at it from not having any kids, but knowing that as I've gotten older and my parents have gotten older, I've recognized them more from adult to adult. So it's that understanding of not only, oh, okay, yeah, we are imperfect. Oh, right. Like I've made a lot of mistakes too. And wow, they were like 21 when they had their first kid. Like you go through all of that in your mind and it really puts things in perspective. But the other thought that comes to mind is if you now have a child of your own, and like you said, you love that child unconditionally. And then you think about them. Mothers come to you, I'm sure, that are like, I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, not every mother is like,
Mm-hmm.
not to say that mothers are helpless, but, there's times in our lives when we all feel like, I just need direction. Like, am I being a good mom? Am I not being? And I feel like that would add to that compassion that you'd have.
Oh, absolutely. And the other part of it is also acknowledging like, if you didn't have healthy parents, where were you supposed to learn to parent? These are things that are modeled. You have to see them in order to learn them. It's not taught in school. So, like, if you're struggling as a mom, it's not because there's something wrong with you, it's that you weren't taught certain skills potentially.
Because that is modeled. You're right. That's something that if you haven't seen what that looks like before, how would you know?
Exactly.
I know we've talked a little bit about you work with women with past trauma, right? And I am fascinated by that topic only because I feel like it manifests itself in so many ways, not only psychologically, but physically in our bodies. Can you tell me just a little bit more about how you work with women to kind of to address that?
Yeah. So when we speak about trauma, so of course, like therapy treats trauma and like diagnoses, whereas coaching treats a situation, right? So, how trauma impacts our brain is that our amygdala takes in information from our environment and it labels it as good, bad, scary, whatever. It tells our brainstem to basically fight, flight, or freeze, which then in turn our prefrontal cortex evaluates the situation rationally and says, oh, it's over, or oh, jump. Like, I did that. So the challenge with trauma is at a certain point, the amygdala is labeling so many things as scary, and you're not able to process through them rationally. So, for example, the amygdala can take a conflict that's going on in front of you between you and a spouse or your kids, and it can react as though it was between you and your mother 20 years ago.
Ah, I can totally see how that would happen.
So, this is where your nervous system gets exhausted. Every interaction you're always preparing for.
That would be triggers, right? Like, what are the kinds of things that trigger you? Because I can imagine, especially if you are in a relationship that is a difficult one, like the way you had mentioned your first marriage, right? If you're in a relationship where the communication is lacking, and then you have a child in the mix of that, and this is all kind of you replaying a family dynamic that you've been brought up in, I can imagine there's a lot of triggering going on back and forth, right? So how do you break that cycle?
I do a lot of work with people in not only calming their nervous system, so doing a lot of mindfulness and body work, but also
Yeah.
recognizing the difference. There are two different kinds of emotions. There are natural emotions that you experience, such as grief or sadness, that level out over time. But then there's something called manufactured emotions. And these are emotions that are based on things you're telling yourself. So, for example, I'm not good enough, or I'm not being heard, or I'm not being respected. Now, if those are inaccurate, they're also causing your body to react. So if you say, you believe I'm not good enough and you're in the middle of parenting, you're going to shut down, or you're going to feel immense amount of guilt. You might end up not disciplining your child or following through on what you said you were going to, which confuses them
Mm-hmm.
because your reaction is to your guilt from the belief of I'm not good enough. We can't resolve the feeling if the belief comes first. We got to resolve the belief, and then the feeling will actually change. And then you can live more consistently in your behaviors and how you want to parent or have relationships.
I think beliefs are the trickiest thing because I talk a lot about thought work with people and my clients. And it's such a big, big foundational piece to beliefs because it's like somebody once said a long time ago to me that I was like, God, that sounds so simple. But they're like, beliefs are really just a bunch of thoughts that you continue to think over and over again.
They're habits, they're bad habits.
Yeah, just bad habits. Exactly. And when you boil it down like that, you come to the realization that, oh, wow, okay, so these can be turned around. This isn't just something that's just going to be in my head and I'm not going to be able to get out of. If I can consciously take pause, recognize what's happening, and then consciously turn those around, you can create new habits.
Oh, and you can resolve gross feelings.
Yes. Do you find, I mean, I feel like your work must be super interesting only because not just what you do, because you're doing the coaching and then you also do the therapy work. So I know they're two separate things. But do you find that, I mean, do you have a lot of stories with women that they turn around pretty quickly, or do you find that that can get, because I can imagine having kids. Now, this is, and once again, I do not say this from experience, but that is probably a laboratory of like tests every day of how you approach life. I'm sure your children mirror back a ton to you. Like there's probably there's such a learning ground in being a parent, right? I think it's an everyday thing. It never goes away. So do you feel like people will come to you and you'll kind of go through certain aspects of these challenges that they're having and then they just continue to evolve and evolve and evolve? Or does it take a lot of time and practice for them to kind of really work through it?
It depends on the person. So, therapy, of course, is for people that have a deeper complexity and deeper traumas, right? We're talking like diagnoses, PTSD, stuff like that. Takes a different approach than coaching. If you work on the foundational junk, I call the stuff that I do in my coaching program really the root cause, right? Your attachment issues, your childhood, how you were treated, what you learned and believed about yourself, which I clearly teach in the program. Like I already know what all these thoughts are because they're the same for most of the women. And so once you know those and see those, it starts to resolve and you start to see the connections between your behaviors and you start to catch them pretty quickly. Some people don't even know they're doing them, but once they're defined, they start knowing what to look for.
Yes. Okay. That's that. I was just going to ask that because it almost feels like it's in recognition is when you can start doing the work, right? Once you recognize it,
Yes.
then it's like, oh, here that comes again. That statement once again that's triggering because of what happened 10 years ago. And I see it for what it is now. Because I think that is one of the key elements in sort of changing behavior and just patterns is awareness.
We have jokes in my house. So my husband won't enjoy me sharing this, but when we go camping and we're putting up our camper, he'll go, everything's going wrong. We're not going to eat. We're all going to starve. And then my son and I will just look at him and start repeating him so he can hear himself back. Right. Which is essentially what coaching and therapy do, right? Do you want to hear yourself say that back? And then he looks at us, but we have these ongoing jokes, right? But really what that is, it's the same thing we do with our kids is when and kids always have these thoughts. Everything's going wrong. I can't do it. Well, once a parent learns their own beliefs that they need to challenge, they can help their kid through them. So, like, my son used to have problems with math, and he used to sit at the table and go, I can't do it. I'm never going to understand it. But me sitting there and walking him through it and going, see, it's not that you can't do it, it's that we got to figure out what you're missing, has helped him become more confident and not shut down as fast.
I think about, right, when you were growing up and all of the things that you've learned along the way, because you have now been working with other people's stories for however many years that you've been doing this. How many years have you been in a therapist?
7.
And then you've been doing your coaching as well.
Yep.
So you have had a lot of experience with other people's experiences. But when you look back 7, maybe 10 years ago, let's say before 2013, what would you say has been your biggest sort of leap forward in recognizing whatever it is about your life that you have shifted or changed or transformed out of?
I think the biggest thing I've learned actually is that it just takes time for people to see things sometimes. So through the therapy that I had when I was first married and then us ending the marriage, that was a huge learning point for me because I've had people that I worked with for years and we finally got to the root of something, or they finally started seeing what I had hoped they would see, right? I don't tell them what to do. I just help them realize in themselves. But the biggest thing I've learned is to be patient with people when they're working on stuff. As long as they want to, sometimes they're just not ready sometimes, but when they are, they are. And that's an exciting point when everything starts clicking.
I was going to say, because they're ready to hear it. They're ready to make those shifts. The thing that comes to mind when I think of the work that you do too is I'm sure that there are often times where you need to work with people on being compassionate towards themselves, right? How does that come up in your work? Do you feel like you have to do that more often than not? Because I feel like when people are trying to work through things that are going to take time and energy and effort and peeling away layers and discomfort, that can come up a lot, especially if you have a lot of shame around it. So do you feel like compassion is something that comes up a lot in your work in terms of being more self-compassionate?
It's 100% my work.
Yeah.
Compassion is at the foundation of all of it. It's giving people permission to feel certain ways. A lot of it is breaking down and it being okay for them to not be okay with their parent, because a lot of them have guilt and shame for even considering that their parent wasn't available to them, or even that they've had certain behaviors in their life that aren't reflections of themselves. They have so much guilt and shame around it. But once I work with them and I'm like, but I want you to understand that that makes sense based on what you went through. So sometimes even promiscuity, right? People can have a lot of guilt and shame around that. But once we talk about how, well, that was how you learned to connect with people, you didn't know any other way to connect. Oh, it was the way I was getting a need met. It wasn't something shameful. There was a reason I was doing it. It wasn't just being impulsive. They start to understand that they're human and things are cause and effect.
Yes. It's funny because when you think about past mistakes or things that people say, do you have regrets about certain things? And I always think about it as you do your best with what you have at the time that you're going through it, right? You reach for what you know at the time, and you may not have known better at the time. I like that because I feel like that it puts it into perspective of like, hey, none of us know all the answers. Like we're all just rowing our own boats here. We're just trying to get through the day. And so I think that brings it home for people. And so that's
Oh,
probably super helpful, especially
absolutely.
if there's a lot of shame involved. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Is we're all doing the best with what we have and the tools we have, and maybe the ones we don't have. Our job is to continue to seek to do better always, right? But better is not perfect.
Yes.
Better is just can be a really slow process, and that's okay too.
Right. Now, when you think of your empowerment coaching and your therapy work, what sort of made you decide to branch off into the empowerment coaching? I don't want to say branch off. I know you're doing it in parallel, but what has made you kind of move down that path and what really drew you to that?
I found that though I love being a therapist, it takes years for me to get the information to people that they need. And I'm all about efficiency. And so my program is about I know the information that you need to get in order to
Hmm.
see this process. And so it's about me giving you all of the information in modules and then you bringing them and we talk about applying them. It's efficient, it's faster, it's streamlined, and it's community based too because it's group coaching. So you're also there's this sense of loneliness and not knowing who you are with this junk, and you get rid of that when you start hearing stories of other people and going, these people get me, versus somebody else saying, which is common. We just had that today in a call. Is one woman said a friend of hers just said, "Get over it. You're an adult. Get over your mom." And it's like, right. But when you come to the group together, you get the information, it starts to click, you ask questions, it starts to click more, you hear other stories of the women in the group and get the support, it clicks more. It is just so supportive and it moves the junk fast. So I tell people I'm essentially giving you 2 to 3 years worth of information it would take me in therapy, and I'm giving you them in a shorter time frame with more support.
And you think that it happens faster because of the support? Because like when you say therapy takes longer, why is that? Is that just because you have to kind of move through different phases with people from a psychological standpoint?
So with therapy, there are so many dynamics going on at one time. So you have relationships, you have kids,
Ah,
you have what you're going through emotionally. And so you're every time somebody comes to therapy, you're kind of going through a huge variety of all of that. There are different types that are highly focused, but it takes one topic and all of the complexity to it, but it takes one topic and it really hones in. And I see this topic, because it's parental based, because it's childhood based, really is the foundation of so many other issues. Like childhood emotional neglect leads to, generational trauma. It leads to, lower rates of employment. It leads to depression and anxiety. So you're like taking the really root of it and you're helping solve it, so that then the other stuff doesn't feel so overwhelming.
Right. But now, so when you talk about your program, what does the program entail?
I work with women and parenting, and it's a 6-month program. It includes weekly coaching, group coaching, as well as a monthly parenting forum, which includes bringing your partner in. It includes a master's level educator who's really good with childhood behaviors and an emotional connection as well. So, talking about the childhood behaviors, connecting with the partner, and letting them understand the parenting styles, but then also working with the woman to help the parenting, but also recovering from the emotional neglect so they can also feel good enough in parenting.
Well, Marie, we're going to share all of your links in the show notes too. So if anybody's interested in learning more, I really, truly, I want to stick close to you, Marie, because I feel like there is a lot going on with what you do. And I feel like there's parallels, and then there's obviously very distinct differences between the two sort of pieces and sides of work that you do. But it's so needed. And I just think the women that work with you, I'm sure, are so, so grateful to have you, because you're very relatable. So I could see if you were my therapist, I'd be like, oh, my therapist is really cool. Because you're just you're just grounded and down to earth. You know what I mean? You don't, and I think that you bring to the table so much because you've had the past to draw from. And I just think it's just it's a great combination. And the fact that you're doing both coaching and therapy work is like icing on the cake.
I just really enjoy what I do. So thank
I
you.
bet you do. And I was going to say, and it's probably very fascinating, all of the things that you learn every day, because there's so much to it. And I once again, I thank you so much for joining us, because I think that a lot of women out there have questions around, especially just things that come up around our upbringing that we're starting to kind of grapple with now. And we never thought that we really were going to have to, until sometimes the rubber meets the road and you kind of need to face some things. So I think this is a very timely discussion and something that's going to be really helpful for women. So thank you so, so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a blast.
Okay, well, that's it for now. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Journeys Through Change podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or really wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us and leave a review if you've enjoyed this episode. And share it with a friend or on social media to spread the good word, so more women like you can find us and join in on the fun. For more information on the podcast or Day by Day book, go to livedaybyday.com.